Hi guys, welcome to another code film. This is the dynamic app configuration code film. It's a two-part code film, or it's a sandwich code film. We're looking at configuring our app dynamically, and we're also looking at database isolation levels. Yeah, we've made mention of all these in the first code film, which is the dynamic app configuration storyline code film EP1. So you can check in the playlist web technologies and find the dynamic app configuration code films for the storyline. We've come very far. We've done some database prep work, and we've done our inline execution. We've implemented our inline execution, and we are yet to implement the file option. Why I consider it to be one of the not one of the best or safest, even because even with this the Hibernate framework, Hibernate is configured using a file way of setting up the framework. So yeah, I wouldn't want to go into that. That's not the focus of this code film. Maybe later on I can throw more reference on Hibernate and other Spring Java frameworks. So in this code film, we said is how we write our file. We're going to write some code for the file dynamic app configuration. So as usual, we're going to start our Eclipse IDE. We'll launch Eclipse IDE, then we'll create a project for our program. Yeah, using our same workspace, experimental workspace. That's the meaning of the XP or experiment workspace. In this code film, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of software engineering, technical. I don't want to say verbosity, but in other words, I'll be dishing out a lot of software engineering concepts, a little more of some software engineering terms, and also I'll try my best to communicate more technically in this code film because it's quite loaded and there are um, a whole lot of concepts that is going to be drawn from this code film, from Java to software engineering to object design to refactoring to restructuring and to other options available, design patterns. All that is going to be summarized in this code film just to throw more light so you don't see your programming journey or software engineering journey as that of a spatial thing. No, everything somehow relates to each other. For example, when you go onto Wikipedia or when you go into Google, when you Google something like um, Java language, it can give you, it mostly throws out some form of description. Java is a high level, yeah, some of this. So Java is a high level class based object oriented programming that is designed to have fewer implementation dependencies as possible. It's so abstract, like how am I going to know what this is supposed to be like? I just know that I want to write some code. So at which point in my programming journey do I really appreciate something like high level class based object oriented programming language? At which height in my programming or journey, or when do I start appreciating um, such technical high high level summary of the language? Yep. So I'll try my best to bring out or dish out those technical things as simple as possible. Try and decipher everything as simple as possible so that we enjoy what we are doing. And because programming is fun, not only fun, it improves your your reasoning, your logical reasoning ability, and also that's a lot of work on your brain. I don't want to talk too much. Yeah, it's really like you like talking. No. I don't want to talk too much. Let's just go get right into what we want to do. Alright, so this is from our inline execution. There's a lot I can say here, a lot and lots and lots, but I'll save everything and create a new project and use that to draw a lot of concept. Even okay, let's open our package. Let's click on our package explorer. So we have one project we called options. No, we won't create a new project, but in this options project, remember we created a package. We called it the demo.startup.inline. So we're going to create another package, or we don't want to create the same app under the same package. No, that wouldn't be our way of going around this, even though that's possible. Along the line, when it comes to testing our isolation levels, that's where some form of restructuring and refactoring may come in. So I'll throw more light on that, or draw your attention to that when I think we are getting there. But for now, this is our package that houses anything that has to do with app inline execution. I could have done in such a way that this would have been demo.startup, then app.java will be named as inline, then other names would have followed. It's a whole lot that this part, that kind of thinking is a whole software object design thinking, because you are looking at how to restructure or how to structure your models so that your code can map. The mapping between your models and your code is quite understandable. That's one thing. So it's not just that you always have to put your application in the package. How you name your package and even the package you do place your app inside affects a whole lot of stuff, from your code, how could your code will be understood, how to be how extensive it will go in terms of extensive, and also it also affects your you are solving a problem. You have a problem statement in front of you, so you want to bridge the gap between the problem statement, the analysis that has been done, the soft system analysis, or the system model that has been drawn. You want to bridge that gap between problem statement and target environment, and where your target environment is a computer, web server, whatever your target environment will be, a mobile phone. But that bridge, that's the object design bridge. That's where we have to do some implementation. Yep. So I want no PowerPoint for this. Sorry, just kindly listen. And if you think you didn't get anything, kindly go back. Feel free to also ask questions in the comment section. Alright, so let's create a new package. As usual, right click on our SRC folder or our source folder. Create a new package. Click on new package, click on package, and we're going to name this package demo.startup.file. Alright, so finish. Create package info.java. I've never worked with this before and I don't know what it does, so I wouldn't even want to check it, but I just don't know what it does. It does, so I will never use that. So our package has been created and we're going to create a new class. So right click on the package, new class, click on class, we name this one app, remind me later, app. This won't happen on your system. What the prompt that came, or the small window that won't show on your system. It's my system because of some coloring that was done for a project. Is the internal bank fraud project, which you can find also on my YouTube channel under banking, the banking playlist. So we also select our public void main, so we're going to select this as well, then app, keep all other defaults, finish. Alright, so here we have we're in our demo.starter file. We have our public class app and we have our main method where all our code is going to be executed. Okay, so another goes to what we did for, or maybe just as we did for our inline execution, in some form of similarity, we're going to have connecting to our driver as usual, because we have to speak to our database and retrieve some or get the isolation level on our database so that we know that we are setting up our system correctly. just as we did for the inline execution. So there's going to be some form of reuse of code here. Yep, just to let you know that reuse of code doesn't mean you didn't write code. You did write code, but um, it's also a software engineering approach that's under object design. So feel free to reuse code as and when you want to, even if it's a template, and you can reuse the template and customize it to suit whatever problem statement you have. There's nothing wrong with that. It just makes your work easier. No, it's not also easier, but why would you want to build from scratch when someone who has done something for you, which you can also look upon to implement your own system? So that in that field or that in such a situation, how you go about your own designing is up to you. Whatever you want to reuse, you want to build from scratch, looking at deadlines, looking at project goals, it's all up to you. So let me just say program. Let me give a comment and say program to um, to set isolation, to set program up to set up via file, something simple. All right. So as we said, we're going to copy some code. Please don't get lost. It's still the same approach. We have to talk to our, first we'll connect to our database, set our transaction isolation level, select the transaction isolation level, get the transaction isolation level, and close the connection. So in this same way, under our main, we're going to do the same thing. So just copy. I'm going to copy this. This the top here. Copy this. Or maybe I'm being lazy. I just the focus is on file. So when we get to file, things will change. So we've copied our URL, username, password as usual for connection to our database. So we're also going to copy our connect and our disconnect method. We're copying everything. We're just not going to copy the whole code. We'll copy so there will be some form of understanding. So we need to talk to our database first. So that's where we have our data members or members for database connectivity or fields for our database connectivity. So that's where we have that there. So we've copied what we need for database. Now we're going to paste the methods or the data members that associates to connecting to the database. So that's what we also have here. Sorry. And I did realize in our previous CodeFilm we didn't give a prompt when we disconnected from our database. So we're going to add a prompt here that when you do disconnect, let us know that there has been a disconnection. So we're going to say, just as we said, successful connection to database. Let me see, disconnected successfully. Oh, it's too quite disconnected successfully, or you can say database disconnected successfully. See, database disconnected successfully. All right. Okay, so now first, we will connect to our database, and then when we're done connecting, we also have to disconnect from our database. So disconnect to our database and connect to our database and disconnect from our database. So when we connect to our database, we have to set we won't set first. Sorry, we're going to read from our file first. So for this method, what we want to do is that we want to read. And what statement do you want to read from our file? We want to read from our file, and so or read from the file, or let me see, make it read from isolation level file. So what statement do we want to read from our isolation level file? And the first thing we want to do is that let us know the isolation level that has been set on our database or for our database. So we're going to read the transaction isolation level, and that's the default transaction isolation level per our database for our database per our database session or user. So that's our default, that's the default transaction isolation level per our database session or user. Yeah, that's the first thing we want to do. We want to read from our isolation file. Once we're able to read from our isolation file, we should be able to print out or display the isolation level read. Then when we are able to display the isolation level read, we also want to be able to set our isolation level or set transaction. Let's say set transaction isolation level. And how do we set our transaction isolation level? This time we want to set it via file. So it's not going to be, so this is what we want to do. It's not going to be like our first one that we did it inline execution, whereby for the inline we did it here inline. So first we want to, as just we said, we want to connect, then we won't set first. Let's read. We'll read from our isolation level. Then when we're able to read from our isolation level, or we'll display it. Once we display it, then we close our connection. So for this one to connect to our database, read from isolation level file. That's the default. And what do we want to read? There's the default transaction isolation level per our database session or user. Display the isolation level that we've read, and we set our transaction isolation level via file, and we'll disconnect from our database. Sorry, pardon me if I have this slight sore throat. Yeah. Okay, so let's connect to our database. Let's test the connection to our database. So let's create our file app to help us with that connection. So we'll say file, and we'll call this one file options app, and we'll create a new app for that. And for file options, so connect to our database. So file options app has to connect to our database. So connect to our database. We first want to test the connection to our database. Alright, then we want to disconnect from our database. So file options app should disconnect from the database. That's the first thing we want to do. Alright, so let's test this. Let's test and see if we can connect to our database. Let's use a different user. For our first user, we worked with social staff John. I didn't make mention of other user like Mary. For let's query and find out our other users. We have Mary, social staff Mary as also as a user. So I want to launch MySQL client to query our server to have a display of our other users on our system. So we have to move to the MySQL directory on our system. And please, you've seen this before in the file execution and the inline execution CodeFilm. If this is also your first CodeFilm you are watching, kindly look through the web technologies playlist to locate the inline execution CodeFilm, so you do not get lost. So this is our bin directory. We copy the address as text. CD. Alright. Then MySQL root password. I'm logging as a root user, so I can view all other users. Alright, so we are inside MySQL client. So first of all, let's show databases. We want to select our client, so let's go straight. Select our client. Select user from MySQL.user. Alright, so let's now we work with social staff John. We're going to work with social staff Mary. So let's copy that. Paste this here. And then the password for social staff Mary is similar to that of social staff John. Just instead of it being John, we're gonna use Mary for that work. Oh, sorry, my keyboard is giving me some slight issues here. Social staff Mary. Let's do this simple. Social staff. Okay, so let's test the connection to our database for social staff Mary. Let's test the connection. So let's run our app. We'll right click on the text editor, run as Java application. Okay, successful connection to database disconnected successfully. Alright, so that's good. So social staff Mary can have access to her database, or the user can have access to the MySQL server. Yeah. Okay, so now let's just do a test. Let's add a few characters. And this user doesn't exist in our MySQL client, because if you do view the response that came from our query, we realize that there is no social Mary having 3 L's or 3 L's after or her name. So there's none in our user. The user does not exist, so our connection shouldn't be successful. Just to let people know that our code is working. It's not like it's not working, just to so unsuccessful connection, access denied for user so yes. So you see it's unsuccessful connection, and it gives you the message cannot enroll because this connection is no and cannot. You can throw more reasons for that by just printing the stack trace, but that's not the focus of this CodeFilm. So let's just change this and save it and run again. Alright, so now everything's working now. Okay, so that was just for connecting to our database and disconnecting. Alright, now with the focus being on files, that's why we are here. It's for this purpose that it's CodeFilms. It's for files. I hope it's not too big. So when we read from isolation level file, so the first thing we have to ask ourselves is that, do we have a file for that, and how is that file going to be created? Is the application supposed to create the file, or the file has been created on the back end Oh, so these are some design concerns. So here's where some design concerns come in, because we want to read from our file. So how do we read from our file? So we are developing the application. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have our file, we are reading from our file. So meaning our file must exist. You understand? If our file does not exist, how do we read from the file? It doesn't make sense. So let's first of all create our file, then we'll read from that file. So click on expand the package explorer, then right click on the project, then click on new, then you click on file, you search and click file, or you navigate down and click on file. So you're going to create a new file, and the file we're going to create is going to be isolation level file. So make it isolation file or isolation level file. Let's work with this. Let's work on the naming a little bit. Isolation level file. Let's have a different name for this. So isolation level file. Yeah, so you click on finish, and realize our file will be created at the root of our project. If you do change the location of the file or you move it anywhere, it's going to affect your code. So just leave it as it is, and that's our file for you. So that's the isolation level file. All right, so we have to be able to read from our file, read from the isolation level file. Our file has been set. For now, there's nothing to read inside our file. Our file is null. So let's create a field for this. And the reason why I want us to create a field as part of the class is because as a field or a data member for the app class is that we want to make our code more understandable. I could have done it here by just saying file, and new file. Then fine, I've created our file, and I'll pass in the name of the file that I want my system to read from. Just the name and as a string. Yeah, pass it as a string. But this approach won't look understandable because it's a file options app. So if it's a file options app, file should also be a member or data member of the class. This is an object design or design concern. So how do I know this? That's because before writing this code, I took some time off to look or not look back. I had a foresight into some pitfalls that can come when writing this code. So those are the design concerns you have to look into. But that's not the reason, but just for you to know that you can create the object here, or you can make the object belong to the class, and all that has a design reason, and it does affect the object model restructuring. So let's just create it to the class for now. It belongs to an object. So yeah, so we're going to see this for our connection. This is all connection fields. These are database connection fields, and we also have our we'll just make a file, just the file field. So our file is going to be private. First of all, it's a file type, so it's a file type, and we're going to name it file. And yeah, I'm going to also explain something here. I'm going to make it private file. Now there are two ways of going around this. When we are creating our private field file, as our file object, are we going to now instantiate a new file for this, whereby we just create our file during compile time, so that it just picks out the name of the file we pass and read from it, or we're going to leave it, set it to null like this. Then when we want to use the file, when we want to use the file, we're going to call our file options app and access the file, and pass whatever, access the file now, and now create a new file object attached to it. So all these are some concerns that you have to look into. Like these are some of the things that came into mind when I was looking at this trying to find my way around this CodeFilm. So even with this, is giving me an error. So create class file. I haven't yet imported the package. Let me just import the file package. So import from java.io. Yeah, so see this file options.file, so you go to new file, and so then you pass the name of the file that you want to read from. So this is a design concern. Get it? So is this way a good way, and what are the consequences it has on the code, or how does it affect my programming? So this is what we are going to do. We wouldn't want to be creating a new file when our app is running, because sorry, we do know from our problem statement that on startup our file should exist. So why would we want to have a new file being created as and when main is running during execution? It doesn't seem much. It's not solving our problem for us. It's like we're creating a new file as and when we think it needs to be done. So if we had a file that we want to create every time, for example, when the internal bank fraud app, we had to create an application log and a fraud log, and that one was being created during runtime. As and when the incident occurs, the files are being created. But this is a case whereby we do not need such a thing, because our file is in code static. We know that that's where we're going to read from. It's a constant, so we wouldn't want to go with this option. So what we can do is that we can create the new file here and bind it to this file and pass in the name of the file. So we'll say file, new file, then we pass the name of the file. My keyboard is giving me issues for today. I cannot go my on-screen keyboard. Alright. The name of the file is the isolation level file.txt. Okay. And someone asked, how do I know that it's .txt? That's because the Windows operating system files, when you create it says by default it's text file. Yeah, if my memory serves me right, yeah, by default it's a text file. Sorry for the noise at the background. Yeah, so that's what I know is a .txt file. So let's just look into this. Let's go into File Explorer and see we are creating a new file. Let's open document, right click, new file. Yeah, so it's rich text document, so that's the default. So even on your Eclipse IDE, if you do say you're creating a new file, it's going to be a text file. So you can even check the properties. Right click on the file and click on properties and move to your system. Okay, so this one we didn't specify, because we didn't specify uh, our extension during file creation. It's not reading as a text file. So let's refactor this a little bit. Let's rename this. Yeah, so refactor and rename and okay. .txt. Right. And let's open to our system properties. Alright, so it's now a text document file. Okay, so yeah. So what would have happened if we didn't do this? I'm sure it would have thrown an exception, and that exception would have helped us to correct that. But anyway, this is good. So we have our file and we're pointing to our file. So it's part of the is a member of the class, which is a good design approach because the file shouldn't be created during runtime. We know that it's going to be created when we compile. This is what we have, a new file, not like in our main and then our code is running and then our files are being created. We don't want that. So even with this, we can make it static and make it belong to the class. So once we say static, we know that it belongs to the class. So our there can be only a single file for this class. We can have multiple files. So every object reads from this single file. What do I mean by that? If we do make it static and we say file options app, you do not have okay, you're in static. Yes. It throws a squiggly line because once you name it as static, you are restricting its access to the class. So change access to static using app declared. Yeah, so it's even it's giving you a warning because you declared it as static. So if you want to access it, it has to be accessed via the class, not via an object. That's the object that's been created. But once you access it via an object, meaning anyone that comes into your application can also create a different file options. Let's say he calls this his object file options app 2, and he also creates a new app for that. And because of you declaring it as static, if it's also to try to access the same file member, we're going to have some design or some warning because it's a static member of the class. It belongs to the class, so this is not permissible. It's going to also say change access fix two problems of the same category in the file. Okay. So yeah, that's with static. So if you want to avoid it being, if you want to avoid this error, we have to, as you are saying, make it belong to, remove the static from it or change access using app. And change access using app means that you're going to make it app.file and this belongs to the class. So with this, you see we do not have any squiggly lines associated with it. Yeah, so this is much more neat as compared to two separate objects trying to access a static member of the class. And once you make it static, it belongs to the class. It doesn't belong to any other object. Sorry for that. That was just by the way. As said earlier, that such things will be on the rise because I also want to cover some software engineering object design concepts. So once it's private and it's static, then well, the best thing to also do is that let's make it final because we do know that this is the file we're going to point to all the time. So if it's final, we cannot point to a different file during our code, during programming or during our implementation of our solution. And why would I want to do that? Because I do know that app.file will not be able to point to any other file per our problem statement that we have. So If I do this, I'm going to be faced with an error because it's final. So if I'm doing this, I want to point to a different file. Let's say isolation level file 2.txt. Get, and this is an error because it's static. And we do know that we have only one isolation level. If we do this, then we have a different isolation level. So for understandability of code and to make your code more understandable, one isolation level file, and then in this isolation level file, we do set every isolation level we want, and that's it. Yeah, so these are some of the object design principles I made mention of that I was going to be explaining along the line. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's it. All right, so file field, so private final static file new file is going to be equal to isolation level file.txt. So that's the name of our file. Now, how do we read from isolation level file? Remember, for the app, for our app that we did for inline options, we realized that we're able to read isolation level, that's the default isolation level, using a method. So select transaction level. Then with this method, we're able to read our isolation level. So the same method can be used here, but just that this time around, the parameters and arguments that is going to accept, for this one, the argument is a string, and the parameter is is a an object of type what, string. So we can use the same method. We don't want to change much of our code, but the parameters and the parameters we'll be using is going to be different because right now we're reading from a file. Yeah, so if also for another high level form of optimization, we could have created an interface, a Java interface for all our methods. And that's when we need it, we implement them. That's another way of using overriding. Yeah, to override those methods, or even create an abstract class all for itself. But that's a higher level of optimization. That's when as and when you want to improve your performance and response time and other criteria. So we also copy this as well. Select transaction isolation level and move to our file options app. Paste that one to in between connect and disconnect method. Alright, so this time around we are not passing a string, but we are passing a file. And we'll call this one file fl. Let's see, file, yeah. Because we also have some statement methods. We look at that into that. So when we do come here, what we want to do is we want to say file options app dot select transaction isolation level. Then we pass a file, and now our file we have is a static file, and the static file belongs to the class, so it's going to be called by saying app dot file. Alright, then we know that we've passed our file here. Alright, so when we do come into our file.file app, this is where we are going to do some file operations on our file. Yeah, so let's get right into it. So I hope it all makes sense. We're no longer passing a string as we did. It's the same method, but we're no longer passing the string to select our transaction isolation level. We are passing a file object to do that for us, and the file object belongs to the class because there's only one file we're reading from. We're not going to be creating new files as we did, or as and when the system requires. This is not part of our program statement. So app.file. So when we select our transaction isolation level, pass the file object, then we're going to read our file and see what is said in our file. And you know what we want in our file? Let's open our file, then type the query to select or to query our transaction isolation level as in when our user is connecting to the database. Okay, so we know the syntax ready. Syntax is select at session dot transaction isolation. So that's our syntax. So we've typed our syntax here to select transaction isolation level. Alright, let's move on. I'm seeing something that will need some form of refactoring, but let's move on. It's all part of the learning process. So that means when we do come here now, we have to be able to read that statement, and that statement that we're going to query is going to be a file. It's going to be a file object, but we have a string. We have some strings we want to read from our string. This is just for this. Remember, this is not the actual file options execution. This is just to know the transaction isolation level we have on our database as our user is connecting to our database. For the sake of assurance, to know that yeah, we are doing the right thing. Just some checks. Don't worry if you are still lost, but it's just some checks that we have to do to know that, all right, now we can read the transaction isolation level from the database. Yeah. So when our file comes in, we pass the file, we know the file is there. We have to be able to read the file. So we have connection to the database. Here we do. Then now we have to be able to read the file. Once we are done reading the file, so we want to read the file. So let's have some comment here, some steps. Read the file. Once you're able to read the file, what do we want to do? We want to copy or save the string into an object. Then when we're done, we want to display or know what our file said. So we want to display our file. So that's in a different method. This to select. So once you are doing select, let's do our selection. Alright, so we want to read our file. We have our file. How do we read from a file? Alright, so there are a lot of ways of reading from a file. We have a lot of Java methods that can help you to read from a file. Let's pull up the documentation so that we know that we are doing the right thing. So let's search for Java file. So this from W3 Schools website, but let's look at what the actual documentation says. This is the API, not the API. What? The tutorial. So you're going to search for the Java tutorial, the Java or the Java documentation itself. So getting started. Yep. So you can click on the Java documentation. There's a reason why I want to look from it from the source and not from any other third party, so that you know that you can search from the source. If you don't understand anything, then you can use any other approach you want to help you to understand. So if you want to even copy someone's code and do something, that's up to you. So overview, then you have the what's new, languages and libraries. So what you are searching for is just how to get started. So where would that fall under? Installation guide, what's new, readme, books, military resources. Tutorial blocks. Quite close here. Let's click and see. I don't think it was new. Installation. Let's click on installation guide. No, installation is how to install. We don't know how to install it. We don't know how to start using the Java language. So it's quite, this JDK6, we don't want such documentation stuff. So let's go back, let's see or we can find, what else we can find from here. So tutorials, it says use the rest of tutorials, guides and API. Search in the company's documentation. If you are not okay with this, just go ahead and type Java tutorials. Then you can just put whatever you want. But because this is more of in-depth and in-depth way of searching for something, it's not all the time that you have to go from ground up. Sometimes it has to be special. Java tutorials, and then good, grab one from Oracle. So you just click on it and remove one. Yeah. So here you go look into getting started and just see what you're looking for. That's if you want to go by a bottom up approach. Every time you want to Google, you want to query something, you want to have a linear way of learning, fine, that's not bad. But if you just want to, hey, I need this, how do I do it, fine, no problem. Just go Java files, Java files tutorial, and you have countless of them, even some from the documentation itself. So yeah, so as we said earlier, there are a wide array of file IO methods to choose from. So there has to be one way that works for all. So there has to be you are looking for the most basic approach of creating and reading a file. You don't want anything too complicated, and you also don't want something that you can also do. You can't write anything about. You just copy the code and you have to start using it. So this from the documentation itself, it talks about, it says a whole lot of stuff. If you're not okay with it, don't go with it. If you're okay with it, then spend some time reading it and dig out for whatever information you want. Yeah, so that's just by the way before actually going to doing something. And one thing too is that you have to spend some time. You jump straight into reading and writing and creating files. You may want to look at the basics first. Then with the basics, find your way around certain things. So your approach to search is up to you. For that, I just don't know how you're going to search, but you just have to dig through the documentation and see which one will work best for you. So buffering streams, optimize input by reducing the number of cores, so you can keep searching. If you are not okay with this, then hey, don't waste so much time. Just go online and see Java basic file operations tutorials. We have some from the documentation, we also have some from tutorials point. Click on the one that you understand and go ahead and do whatever you have to do. So if you think you're okay with the one from tutorials point, fine, no problem, you go with it and you work with it. If you're not okay with that, you want another one from Java T point, tutorials point, if you read and you understand, then you go with it. If you read and you do not understand, then you keep searching till you find what you want. Yep. So but the one that I've discovered that works well for me has to do with the buffered reader, and that's what I'll be using in this CodeFilm. Yeah. This is the buffered reader approach that I'm going to be using, the buffer streams. And the reason is that you want to read one line, you're just reading a single line, you want to buffer your read. When you say you want to buffer, you want to you're reading just a single string, so it's like a buffer. You pick what you want and you leave in that buffer. Yeah. If I was explaining right, so that's why I go with the buffered reader approach. So with the buffered reader approach, there's some things you can read over here, and there's not the time to do that for me. So you just look at the syntax, new buffered reader, and it needs a new file reader. A new file reader is also an object that the buffered reader depends on, a box way of calling and using methods in Java. Methods, objects, so we'll go with the new buffered reader approach. But before you use the buffered reader, you have to have a file reader. So buffered reader has to be part of the documentation, because once you can create a new object for it, meaning that there's an API or there's an API for the buffered reader in their documentation, and you also have And buffered reader is a class, so you can type buffered reader in Java, and you dig more into buffered reader by clicking on the documentation to class buffered reader. Yeah, so how do you use buffered reader? In general, each read request made of a reader causes a corresponding read request made to an underlying character or byte stream. So that's why I say a string, one stream. So what we have in our isolation file, the text is a stream, the string is a stream. So yeah, it's therefore advisable to wrap a buffered reader around any reader whose read operations may be costly. All these are design stuff. So this is how you go ahead with buffered reader. So every buffered reader must have a file reader. It's something that has to do with Java. So without buffering, each invocation of read or read line could cause bytes to be read from the file, converted into characters, and then written, which can be very inefficient. So it gives us the reason why we are going buffered reader, because we don't want to just read bytes, we want to read a single stream. When I say a single stream, we want to read select isolation level stream. That's all. Okay. So I think it's all making sense now. So this is the example of the statement. And you know, it also needs file reader. So you may want to also look at file reader to know what file reader accepts, as in when you are creating that object, that's the constructor. So you also search for file reader Java. So it says it takes a file object, creates a new file reader, giving the file to read from. So you can click on it, and so a parameter is the file to read from, and creates a new file reader. So we're going to go with the buffered reader because we want to read a stream. Yeah. So let's go into our Eclipse IDE and say read our files. So how do we read our files? We're going to say buffered reader is equal to new buffered reader. We're going to have a new file reader, and we're going to pass our file. Right, the reason we are having, so we have some squiggly lines. Let's first of all import our buffered reader, import buffered reader, then import our file reader. Yeah, so this is what we are going to read from. Import. Okay, there's more to this, but I'll let's leave it. So if any exceptions are thrown, you know how to handle that. So read buffered reader br. So now I want to save the string into an object. How do we do that? Buffered reader is an object, so buffered reader has methods that we can use to read it from a file. So we want to read a line, so that's what we want to do because we only have a single line. So read from a line, and someone say, how does read line works? Is it iterative? Is it just one time? Oh, that's a good question. So we come to our documentation and we search for read line. How did I do this? Control F search. Click on read line. Reads a line of text. A line is considered to be terminated by any one of a line feed, that's escape sequence, and a character, a carriage, escape sequence as a new line, yeah, a new line, and or a carriage return of followed immediately by a line feed. So it's going to read to, what means that it's going to read to reaches a new line. So if it doesn't reach a new line, it's not going to stop. So reads a line of text. So it gives you some impression of looping. If you still don't agree, you can say read line Java buffered reader. So you can have some examples to know how it works like. So we'll look at the one from tutorials point and see how this works. So it's going to be iterative. You can also spend some time. A string contains the contents of the line, not including any line termination. So how do we read? So this is how it's going to read. br.readLine till you get to what? Null. That's null. Null is the end, or yeah, nothing at all. Yeah, so that's the same thing we're going to do here. So remember, we say it has to execute a query. So our SQL object will still keep it as such. Let's have an object for that. We'll have an object for that. So we'll say while you are reading from your file and you are saving it into, while you are reading from the file and you are saving it into SQL or our SQL object or SQL object. If we are yet not at the end of the line, keep on reading. So this is what it means. So keep reading till you reach the end of the line, and it's only a single line. So as you are reading, if SQL doesn't point to null, then fine. If it does point to null, then stop reading. That's what we are trying to do over here. So string.SQL, let's create an object for that, and let that point to null. So it's going to read till it reaches the end of the line. So whatever that we have is going to be passed or saved into our SQL object. That's, we save the string into an object, and that's the query we are going to execute. Alright, so let's handle the statements in the squiggly lines under our statement in our result set. So we'll go into our inline options file and we'll copy those objects that we declared. Yeah, let's copy those objects, the SQL members, and we'll paste it in our file options app. If I'm moving too fast, please let me be aware in our comment section, so next time I take my time to explain these concepts. Yeah, so everything's working now, and the reason why I'm making it belong to the class is because, as we did for as it belongs to the class, and so why I'm making it a data member is because, as we did for inline options, you know, the object is going to be encapsulated in the class so that it has its scope can be accessed by other methods. If you restrict the object scope just to a method or a block, the object cannot be accessed by other methods. So it's going to affect our code in terms of cohesion. Yeah, in terms of cohesion, yeah. So we don't also have to be tightly coupled. It shouldn't be also loosely. It should also have a low cohesion. Yeah, these are some software engineering terms. Yeah. All right. So read.line throws it's giving a squiggly line because it throws an exception. So how do we handle this? You can add a throws declaration. You can surround with a try catch. So yeah, and this also throws an exception. Yeah. So we'll handle the perfect reader exception with a feature in Java called try with resources. So try with resources allows us to close our file when we are done. So this is the try with resources syntax. Okay, try with resources. Let me verify the syntax for that one. Try with resources Java. Try with resources helps you to close an object by just typing that it closes an object for you. So try with resources. I think I'm doing the same thing now. Yeah, so we close it and open our syntax in this way. So try with resources, then you have our so we're going to put everything inside here now. So let's move string SQL top here so that it's not affected by scoping. So try resources. Um, we're going to what we've done that we've boxed our object inside the try resources um, parameters. Sorry, the parentheses. Then we're going to open the block. So what we want to do is that we want to read our Java object. If you didn't want to go with try resources, you could have gone with choose more exception about handling. You could have gone with just surrounding with a try catch. Ah, you know what? Um, and this object too is not going to be found because its scope is lost. Oh wow! Alright, so let's don't let us be lazy. Let's do it. Let's see what we can do about this. It's better we look at it that way than to and handle whatever exception it has to be done. So which of the exceptions is it trained on? Okay. So let's print the stack trace because yeah, let's just print the stack trace. Let's just work with the try resources. But let me speak a little bit more about try resources. Try resources, when you use try and catch blocks, when you're closing, you always have to close your file. And if you don't close your file, there will be leaks. But with try resources, it does that work for you automatically. Yeah. So the resource is closed. And try resources ensures that each resource is closed at the end of the statement. So that's one thing about using try resource. If you're not going to use try resources, you have to go with finally blocks and try statements. We can make your code look very unpresentable and it can look very clumsy. So yeah, so that's why we are going to try with resources so that we can close our statement. But even with what we are doing, it looks a little bit clunky for me because of the way we are declaring a catch block inside our try with resources. Yeah, but anyway, so let's move on. Yeah, so we could, yeah, there's one way. The fact that I'm still handling the catch blocks here just disturbs me because I didn't want to do that with the try resource because it doesn't make our code look cool to me. It looks weird now. But hey, if there's any error, we'll handle it. So let's move on. Let's just move on. So once we've been able to save our SQL statement as a string in our SQL object, we're going to execute our query. Yeah. So everything looks fine now. Let's call our select options. We've been able to do that. App.file. Now let's display the isolation level. So how do we display the isolation level? So we have the file options app. Just as we did for the inline options, we call our get isolation level method. So we're going to do the same thing. I come to app. That's from the inline execution. Then we'll copy the same code here. Paste it here. Let's call this file options. So get transaction isolation level. Let's copy that method as well. Please, there's a way of, as I said, there's a way of restructuring all these codes that you could have read this from an interface or package, put them into an abstract class, abstract methods. Can go on and on and on. That's when we're looking at optimization and improving our code, restructuring of our code, and a whole lot. And that's very handy because if I'm going to create another application and I don't need to struggle to define the same method. I should just be able to call them from an interface or a class or something of such a sort. A package, just import it and use the methods and override them as and when I need it. So that's also object design. Yeah, so we looked at select transaction isolation level. The method we've just copied now is get transaction isolation level. So because we made RS, does the object RS belong be a data member or a field of the class? You see now this object can be accessed in a different method. If we restricted it to that of only the select transaction isolation level method by making it in a block scope or encapsulating it here, we wouldn't have been able to um, call our result sets in terms of executing our query or saving our result set. That's the query execute, saving it into the result set object. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, that's it. So let's see what we're gonna get. So let's run our code, test. Let's see. So isolation level file. Yeah. Oops. So string an exception. Let's see. Cannot issue a null query. So let's see. Cannot invoke because this RS is null. Wow. Null query. Let's go and see where the error is coming from. Null query. Null query. Null query. File. File. Okay. We are reading our file. Okay, let's see. Before we even execute the statement, let's implement some diagnostic triggers. Let's debug or let's SQL object. Let's see what we have inside that object. Are we getting our string? So let's do debug SQL object. Let's see what we have inside that string, if it's null or if we are able to read from our line at all. Let's run the app. So it's null. There's no reading. It's not been able to read anything from our file. So now let's go and still verify. Let's see what's wrong with our file. Let's go. Let's dig deeper. So it is null. So what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Why can't we read from our file? Isolation level file.txt. A file. Read the file. Oh, okay. No, receiving the syntax here. Read line. Let's do this. Let's also see what we have. When it reads, it's supposed to be iterative. So let's debug here as well and see what we also have inside our while statement. So let's debug SQL object inside while statement. So sys out. Let's see what's coming on. Debug SQL while statement. Let's run this and see. Yeah, so that's fine. We can read. That means our object is being saved fine. It's going into our file. But when we are done reading, oh, okay, because it's reading from a file. Once it reads this line, the next line is going to read is null, because it's returning as null. Wow. So we have to handle this, otherwise it's going to be a problem. I hope it makes sense. Once you read this line or this string, the next stream is reading is an empty stream, so it's always going to be null. So we have to save this object, then copy what we've read into an object so that we don't lose the SQL object. So how do we do that? Are we going to have to have another object to handle that? So we can have the main, we can call this one also as file SQL, and this one points to null. So after you've done, we've been able to debug it, which means it's working. So you can have if statements here, control flow, just to handle that. Or we can let's see if there's another way we can go around this. All right, so this is what we can do. You can say let SQL be equal to SQL has been read already. I want to use the ternary operator to make this easier. So file SQL should read, let file SQL read instead. So file SQL is reading from the line. So we want to save to SQL, and the only reason we want to save to SQL what we get from file SQL. So save to SQL object. But before we save to SQL object, so this one will copy to SQL object whatever that it has. So if it has a text, it will copy the text the next time to come to print out the null statement. But so something has to be done to check that. So how do we check that? So you can see that the one way we can do is say if file SQL is equal to null, so we can say while file SQL is, if file SQL is not yet equal to null, if you haven't yet reached the end of the line, then fine, give me what you have. That's one way. So if you haven't yet reached the end of the line, save the object. So this one is a save to an object while not yet at end of file. Yeah. So this is one way we can handle that. So we'll save or we'll copy the object to it. You can leave the comment here, or if you want to make it more relatable to the statement, you can just put it by it, and that's a line comment. Yeah, so this is one way we can do this. So while file SQL is not equal, then you copy. So then the next time it comes, it's going to be null. We don't know how to handle that one. This is one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is to use ternary operator. The use of ternary operator is what I'm trying to figure out. What about see let SQL be equal to, how about define a ternary operator, and I'll say that if file SQL is not yet equal to null, then I'm going to execute a certain query. So if file SQL is not yet equal to null, then let's rather sorry. If file SQL is not yet equal to null, then copy file SQL. So what if it's equal to null? If it's equal to null, then say null, then point it to null. This is using the ternary operator. Any one of them should work fine. So if while file SQL is not yet equal to null, then copy file SQL to SQL. So what if we are not equal to null? If we are not equal to null, then you can add a statement here by saying whatever. You can put a print statement. You can type a string, or type a string here. Or that string will be saved into your SQL object. So you can say this is the statement I want to have here. So empty string. Yeah, this one is also there. So we have two ways of handling this error. So two ways of handling buffered data at So the first approach is approach number one, and the more elegant one is approach number two. That's if you want to have some statement or syntax, an error message you want to, a response you want to give to the user. So let's test the first one and see. Let's see what we'll get. Let's comment this one out. Any one of them should work out. So even after debugs your SQL object, we still have to be able to see the string that has been saved. So let's first of all, let's leave it as it is and run our code. Alright, so it's good, it's working. So this approach is working. We've handled the error, debug SQL in one statement. Yeah, before that is null. After we've read, it has become null. So it's true that it is null, but we've been able to save the object. So select has been saved. This is approach number one. Now let's look at approach number two, the more elegant way of doing this using ternary operators. I hope you are enjoying this and I'm not moving too fast. I really want to move to the main purpose of this CodeFilm, that's setting the transaction isolation level. All this is just checks because remember we said the default database isolation level is repeatable. So all these ones is not really my focus, but I have to still do it so that the CodeFilm will be appreciated. So let's look at this method. Let's approach to the more elegant way. We run our code, and this one also works. So you can go with option method 1 or method 2 using the ternary operator using the F statement. I think I like this one. It's more elegant, more sexy, one line of code. Yeah. Alright, so that's for our, that's it for, so good. That's good. That means we can read from our SQL object. It's nice. That's good. So yeah. yeah. Let's keep our code tidy. Let's put all this in a block comment and fold, and let's fold it. Should we have the code? Should be able to fold code here. Enable folding. All this. Why can't I fold my code? Oh, I'm supposed to be able to fold my code. Oh, I don't like such headaches. And enable folding. Enable folding, so I'm not seeing anything. Well, what do we do now, guys? What do we do? Because I'm supposed to be able to collapse comments. This is sad. This is so sad. I just don't know what's happening. The methods can collapse, but this comment is not collapsing. I wouldn't want this to be here. It makes the code looks some way. Alright, so yeah, so even now let's just forget it. It's not good to cut and erase your code. No, let's just leave it. Let's just leave it there. Alright, so now let's go a little bit more into why we are having this our CodeFilm. So our CodeFilm here is to talk about setting our transaction isolation level and performing our work. So reading from isolation level was just for us to know that we can read from our isolation level. More of some prep work to confirm that our isolation level is at repeatable read. I repeat, repeatable read is the default database isolation level for MySQL, and this can be found in the MySQL documentation. It has been made mention in the inline options execution. So if we still want to read more about that, you can pop up the documentation and read more about repeatable read isolation level MySQL. And some form of documentation comes up. It is the default isolation in MySQL. So that was just by the way. So now the main CodeFilm is to be able to what? Set the database isolation level what? Via a file system. So just as being able to select, we're also going to set. So we're going to have, so this, we're going to have another line of code you're going to write. So we've read, we've displayed, now we have to set. Yeah, we want to set. So we've been able to select, we've been able to display. So how are we going to set the transaction isolation level? So it's here that probably I want to restructure my code a little bit, because if I don't set, how do I read? Setting will confirm that I've read. So we're going to do some object restructuring here to make our code more understandable. Yeah, so if you compare it to what we have in our inline options, we have to set before we did display or get. As I said, this was just prep work checks. So we are going to do the same thing. We're going to copy the set transaction isolation level method. We'll paste it inside our file options right below get transaction isolation level. No, let's write right above, because we mostly set before we get. Paste this here. Set transaction isolation level, and we are no longer passing a string, but we are passing in a file as our argument. So our parameter is now going to be a file, an object of type file. And just as we've done for our select transaction isolation level, we also have to have our buffered reader doing the same work it did for our it's going to do the same for our set transaction isolation level. So we're also going to copy this code here, the same thing. We'll copy everything and we'll paste it into our set transaction isolation level. And we'll comment what we already had here, the existing code. We'll comment to it. If we don't need it, we'll just delete it from there. So set transaction isolation level. So if we are setting our transaction isolation level, we have to execute a query. So system. So we're passing a SQL object. So a SQL object is being read from a file. So that's what we are doing. We're reading from our file. We read the line from our file, receive it into our SQL object. The SQL object will come and perform our execute query. Remember, this time we don't use execute query because it's not a query. Some queries will don't return a response from our server, and that's one. These are one of the queries that's setting. And this has been made mention in the inline execution CodeFilm. So we wouldn't need this line of code, so we can boldly delete this one and use what we've copied from the set transaction isolation level. Alright, so this is what we are going to be doing now. So I think that's it. That will be for the changes. We've just refactored it a little. So remember, we have to set before we read. So here we will no longer read first. We will change this approach now and set before. Remember, this way was just a way of checking. We just wanted to confirm one or two things. Always put that in mind. So first we'll set. Let me solve that. So let's set first options up dot set, and we pass the app.file. Yep, so once we set, we can get the transaction isolation level. But before we get the transaction isolation level, we should be able to select it first. So we have to select. Yeah, so select. After setting, we select, and then display. Yeah, so then we are done. Yeah, so this is what we're going to. So we set the transaction isolation level, and that's reading from app.file. We also want to select the transaction isolation level. Right, so what we have now is just to select. So we have a file to select, and then this is the file that we want to use to read, configure our app dynamically. We're also pointing to the same file to select our transaction isolation level. So there'll be an error, or we'll have some form of in quotes deadlock, and we don't want that to happen because one is to set and one is to read. But you really want to, your focus is to read more. So setting is not, your focus is to set. So reading, yeah, okay, fine. Let's also get, so sometimes you also have to have are you going to have a separate file just to read? That's one way. Or you can write a query, a simple query inside our select transaction isolation level, so we know what we are reading from. That's another way. So for the sake of good design, don't let us have two files, because one file we said is for the purpose of what? Reading, and that's our app.file, this file. So iso file, let's see, we make it more iso level file, iso level file. That's the name of the file, iso level file. So we're just going to make it iso level. So iso level file reads our isolation level, so we can set it. So iso level file can also do the same for selecting. It's wrong. It's to having two separate executions inside one. No, we don't want that. Where we are doing set session transaction isolation level, set transaction isolation level, and repeatable. I hope I got the syntax right. Yeah, we don't want something of this sort. No, we don't want two SQL statements in one file. No. The reason we went with this app configurations that we said this is more improves our separation of concerns. So let's find a way of implementing select transaction isolation level without calling any method externally. So any file externally, sorry. So select transaction isolation level. We are going to look into that. How do we do our selection? We are not reading from a file anymore, so we don't need our perfect reader. We are just executing a query. So we can type the query just right here, and we'll do away with all this. Let's comment first. Don't just clean code, comment first. Yeah, we're having a nested comment. Let's handle this now. Okay, and we pass our query here. So this one can be tied to our app inside our method. We don't really mind as of now because that's not our focus. That's an isolation. Select a transaction isolation, sorry, isolation. Right, so this is our query. So this one is bound to the select transaction isolation level method, so it's typed inline, and that one it's not much of a concern to us because we didn't make that the agenda of our CodeFilm. So let's now set our transaction isolation level. So we've handled that. So app.iso_level file handles setting of the isolation level. So let's pass the statement for setting our transaction isolation level. So let's set it from repeatable read to serializable. So set transaction set session transaction level to serializable. Confirm, sorry, the statement. Set session transaction isolation level. So isolation. Set session transaction isolation level to serializable read. So let's save that. Yeah. Okay, so now we've set it to serializable read. So if we are selecting, we should be able to read that. So that one works. I won't clean any code. So if it works, then fine, I can easily clean. But commenting is the best. Just like we can't fold the code for it to look neater. So yeah. So let's run our code. Let's see the response. So this time around, we are setting via what? A file. Selection is being done inline. That's not the purpose of this CodeFilm. And we'll display the results that we get from our database. So in our file, we said serializable. If this works, then we go into the extensive testing as we did for the in-file execution. So let's run our code and see the outcome. Voila, it's working. So it's now set to what? Serializable. The statement was executed as true. So you can clap ourselves over here. Our code is working and it's via a file. So just as we may mention that your project manager comes to you now, inline execution CodeFilm, that someone, we are tired of serializable, it's giving us concerns here and there. Can you kindly change it to something else? This is the code. You see, this is our code. I no longer have to come to our code to do this work. Not at all. All that work can be done in just the file. So let me show you how this is more dynamic. So let's open the file directory. Let's locate it on our system. So right click on the file, properties. Now we move to where the file is located on our Windows system. So this is where our file is located, isolation level file. So once you open this file, we can now set it into anything we want. We can even close the app. Let's close our project. I don't need to come here again. Close my project. I've saved it. So now just set it to something else. No more serializable. Let's set it into read uncommitted. That's another isolation level. I'm done. I close my file. Alright. Now let's go and locate. Okay, next time I'll have the binary file so I don't execute the application via Eclipse. So I will have that bin file, the binary file that's been created. That's the bin. That's the output, the actual output when you're done executing your file. The executable file. Yeah. So let's compile this now. We've done this setting in our background. That's inside our ISO level file. We've done the settings part. So we now know that it's being set to what? Read uncommitted. So there's no way that there's no way that we did this via the app. We didn't do this in the source code. We did it in the file. So let's run and see the current isolation level. So right click, run. So you see it's read what? Uncommitted, without opening the code, without opening our source code. The next one is to have the release. It would be nice if I can have the release. So once I'm done, debug as the actual release. that binary file that we need that I don't come here and let's see. I have to be able to get a release. If I can get a release, it will be to be more interesting. How would the release be on my system? Let's run this again because it's going to be compiled. It has to come as some bytecode. So where is this on my system? Probably have to take my time and locate that one because it's still coming as app.class. Or okay, maybe I can execute it down via the execute it via the JVM. That would be another week. I don't know. I have to find a way of getting a release. Start to be more. For now, I think you are okay with the explanation here. There's that separation of concern, but the fact that I have to open my app to run it is what I don't like. It would have been nicer if I could just have the release, so that you just work with the Java. You just compile the Java code via the class, the app class. Let's get a little bit nerdy and see. Command prompt. And let's cd to where our file is. Location of our project. Let's go into that. Most especially the source file, the demo startup file. Let's copy the address as text. And let's execute it via the JVM cd. Sorry, I say via the JVM. And let's execute it from our command prompt so that we have that feel of dynamic app configuration. So cd file and Java. So I want to execute Java and then the class name. Java and app.java. Let me see. I need the class. The class itself. Class not found. The class file. Sorry. The class file is our bytecode. So it has to be in bin. So let's move that. Let's step here rather. Copy address as text. CD backwards. CD backwards. CD backwards. Let's see. Java app.class. How do I execute this? Java C app.class. Okay, let's see. Java C help. Java C is the compiler. Let me just Google this straight away. Java C options and then the source file. Okay, let me Google this straight away. So Java C. Okay, let's check this instance. So we need .java. So let's go and check again. Let's go for the .java instead. cd backwards, cd backwards, cd backwards, cd backwards. We are now in our options. So let's look for the source file cd. Let's have c dir cd demo dir cd startup dir cd file dir. So Java C, say app.java. Let's check the syntax. The statements. Right, so let's run this and see. Okay, it's working. It's working because it has compiled alright. I need a binary. Just running this in. It's not printing anything for me. Probably I wouldn't. I don't know if I have to. I didn't prepare much for the command line way of executing. Even though it's made out works much more easier, but don't worry. We shouldn't worry about that for now. I have to spend some more time to do that. Java C. Yeah, maybe I have to spend some more time to try and see how I use the command line to do that. Because it has been way cooler, like way cooler to see that you just changing the file and you come and compile with Java C and you just see your code. You can see that I didn't touch the source code at all. In no way. I just changed everything in the file and then it runs. Okay, and after that I should now type my class file to run the program. Sorry. So we type Java C now, Java app.java. Just app.java. Okay, so now app. So Java app. We upgrade issues. Okay, I think we're having some versions. We should have version. Yeah, so it says our app has been configured by a more recent version of the Java runtime, which is version class version. So it's not going to work. So I'm so sorry. This has to be looked into privately. Yeah, this is Java 9. The runtime here we are using is Java 9. That's for our system, but this is from our system part. But what we have for our project is that of Java 14. You can right click options, go into properties, Java build path. You can see that the JRE we are using is that of Java 14. So it makes sense. Unless we downgrade or we point our system, our Java system on our system environment to that of Java 14. Java 14. I wouldn't want to touch this for now. It will create a whole lot of issues. So yeah, but yeah, so unfortunately, our code film is not going to look that silky as we wanted. But you did realize that I didn't touch our code to cause the changes. It's just running the code that has to be done via the Eclipse IDE, which I really wouldn't. I wish I wouldn't have done it this way. And then now, if I come back to my file, let's change the isolation level to something else from serializable. Let's change it to read committed. Let's save it. Close. Let's run our code again. So we're going to move. We're supposed to see read committed. Run. Right click. Run as Java application. Read committed. So as compared to inline where we were changing everything inside our code, this one everything is being done via a file. So if we also run this, this one was done via code, inline code, but this is going to be done via a file. So if we move to the file, isolation level file, we are going to cause those changes. So let's set this one also to serializable. Yeah. So we are supposed to see serializable here too as well. Yeah, so thank you so much. That's it for the code film. And this is why I say it improves our separation of concern. Yes, from yeah, that's all. Sorry I couldn't make the Java C work. It would have been nicer. Oh, it would have been nicer. But hey, let's move on. Now we have to test our isolation levels for the users. This is where our main use case comes into play. So this was just on startup. This was just on startup options. So we've looked at those lots of the inline and file. So it's now left with our actual code film of the social security numbers and some few CRUD operations we made mention about per the isolation level. So we've been able to do all this, and now we have to perform some CRUD operations per our isolation level in the light of our use case of social security numbers and the storyline that was said in the data in the dynamic app configuration um, storyline. That's our first cool film under the web technologies playlist. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. I apologize again for the Java C errors. I wish I could have done that one to make it more silky, but hey, we always learn and we always grow. Alright, so we are not yet done yet. It's now time for the testing of the isolation levels and our social security number. So stay tuned. Thank you.